Good morning, and thank you for coming out for this very special ABNY members-only briefing, an event harder to get into than a Taylor Swift concert, but yet far less expensive. It is our pleasure to have Majority Leader Chuck Schumer as our speaker today, and by the way, I should say, like at ABNY, Chuck essentially is our Taylor Swift, which makes Iris Travis Kelce winner of the Super Bowl. Look, he is no stranger to our community. And given we all know he schleps each year to all 62 counties in our state, he literally is no stranger to any part of New York. And that's meaningful. Chuck shows up. He shows up for New York, and he shows up for so many other people and places who need help. In this time of divided government, he is tackling our most pressing national issues. First, like Atlas bearing the world on his shoulders, he kept the federal government funded time and again, keeping at bay the extremists who want to create a crisis. Regarding the border, he has the wisdom of Solomon. There is actually a bipartisan plan to secure and stabilize the border before Congress, thanks to his leadership. Regarding AI, the biggest force today in tech, unlike Oppenheimer, Chuck wants us to understand great power before we unleash it. He has marshaled people from both parties to engage directly with the tech industry to understand the ramifications and seek a common sense approach to large language models and machine learning. On the world stage, Dr. Kissinger recently passed away, but we still have Chuck respected globally. He just returned from the Ukraine, where he is keeping America's faith with our allies. He marshaled the aid package for Ukraine and Israel through the Senate, despite many impediments being thrown in his path, and is keeping pressure on the House to make good on our promises. As a champion of infrastructure, he is the Robert Moses of our time, albeit a Moses who cares about our diverse communities. Chuck has unstuck some of the biggest and most critical infrastructural projects in our region. And the day that Gateway and the next phase of the 2nd Avenue subway open, we'll have Chuck to thank. And all this on top of his achievements from the last Congress, the CHIPS Act, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the American Rescue Plan, the Inflation Reduction Act. He's got a better passing percentage than Joe Namath. Chuck, we cannot say it enough. Thank you. Thank you for your leadership, for your integrity, your endless passion, and for being our senator. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm ABNY welcome to our Majority Leader.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stephen. It's great to be here with everybody. And I always like to tell a story, so I'll tell you this one. Stephen mentioned that I visit every county every year, and I do. I've been to each county at least 25 times, many of them hundreds of times. How did that happen? When I first ran in 1998 against Al D'Amato, he was the incumbent senator. He was a big powerhouse, head of the banking committee, head of the Republican campaign committee, you name it. And when he went upstate, he said, Schumer's from Brooklyn. If he gets elected, you'll never see him west of the Hudson. So I made a promise. I said, God willing, I win, I'll visit every county every year. So I did. In my first term, it worked out well. In 2004, my first re-elect, I got 71% of the vote. That was a record. And I carried every county but one, Hamilton County. Now, for those of you who know your New York geography, Hamilton County is a beautiful county. It's in the middle of the Adirondacks, beautiful lakes and rivers and hunting and fishing and hiking. But it's our smallest county, only has 5,000 people. So I'm sitting the next day and I'm sort of bragging. You know, I have a great chief of staff, Martin Brennan, who's here. Yes, he deserves applause. And he keeps me in line, you know. So I'm sort of bragging. I said, Martin, why do you think we won every county but one, Hamilton County? He says, that's obvious, Chuck. I said, what do you mean it's obvious? He said, yeah, it's obvious. He said, look, it's our smallest county, only has 5,000 people. I said, yeah. He said, true to your promise, you visited it 6 times each year. I said, yeah. He said, well, it's obvious. It's the only county where you actually met every single voter. Anyway, I love visiting the counties. I got a lot of stories about them, but I'll spare you. I want to thank Stephen Rubenstein for the great job he does and has always done on behalf of New York, which we love. I want to thank Chad Perkey and the entire ABNY team. And my wife Iris is here as well. She's not part of ABNY. But I want to tell you, I continue to look forward to work with ABNY and all of you in this room to make New York a better place to live and work. As you know, New York's in my bones. I just love this place. It is who I am. And before I Love New York became our state's motto, it was my credo, always was. So let me talk about, elaborate on some of the things Stephen mentioned. First, I'm relieved to say that the Senate, at midnight Friday night, just before about 6 p.m. Friday evening, just before the deadline of the government running out of money, we reached an agreement to avoid a shutdown by passing the first 6 of our funding bills that we considered under our staggered approach. Now, I wish we didn't have a staggered approach in the first place. We used to pass the whole budget at once, but funding with this new House is a long and drawn-out and convoluted process. It's difficult to negotiate with another party that's actually dominated by extremists. They don't even believe in government. Some of the largest funders of this Freedom Caucus, the 30 hard-right people in the House Republican caucus, are people like, they're people who just made billions of dollars in the Anadarko Basin or the Permian Basin, oil billionaires, and their basic attitude is, I made my money all by myself. How dare your government take my money from me? I shouldn't pay any taxes. And they get this Freedom Caucus group to be against everything, funding anything, even defense, even Ukraine, and that creates the problems we have. But my job is to be a legislator. I admire what Max Weber said. Max Weber, the great German sociologist. By the way, when I went to college, I thought there were 2 great German sociologists, Weber and Weber. And I only had realized that I only read about Weber and heard about Weber. It's spelled W-E-B-E-R. But in any case, he said, politics is the most noble profession. He said, it's the screwing of hard boards together. That's my job. That's what I do. And I'm very proud of that. Anyway, New York's going to benefit immensely even from these 6 budget bills we signed. I'm always looking to help New York in every way. So in this bill, we got $2.2 billion for the capital investment grant this year. That is critical for our infrastructure, Gateway. We get a big chunk of the money because I help write these programs. When Moynihan left, he said, one of your legacies is to make sure that the transportation bill stays good for New York, and I have. We have secured 7 years of the extension of the Undetectable Firearms Act. This was passed in 1980-something under Reagan, and it says that firearms have to have some metal in them. Otherwise, and it's much worse now with, 3D printing, but you could make a plastic gun. It would be undetected when it went through a metal detector. Imagine the chaos in the stadiums and in the subways and in all these areas where there are lots of people, schools, where they use metal detectors. Well, these crazy right-wingers wanted to let this expire. But we got it passed for another 7 years, and we defeated 50 extremist gun-related riders. We fully funded the Department of Justice's Community Violence Intervention and Prevention Program, which really has flourished here in New York. It brings down violence in our streets, especially after the spike in the pandemics. People from the community go out on the streets and show these kids who are hanging out that there's a better way than gangs and violence. And it works. They're beautiful people. I know them. A fellow named Kay Bain, who would work for Jumaane Williams, helped set this up, and it's now spread around the country. We put money for that in there. We got $32 billion in tenant-based rental assistance. We know we have a housing shortage in New York. It's going to provide, it's a $2.1 billion increase, $337 billion for the tenant voucher protection program, $418 million in the homeless assistance. We fully funded SNAP and WIC. These guys wanted to cut WIC. Food for pregnant moms that make their babies better. They wanted to cut it. We got it fully funded. So even in this bill, you say, well, they got a budget done. What does it mean? It means a lot of things for New York, particularly the way we've written these programs. What we're waiting on next, we have another tranche of the budget, the next 6 bills to do by March 22nd. And then after that, we have the National Security Supplemental. Let me tell you, This is vital for the future of America. Vital. This is a turning point. We're right at an inflection point. If we don't fund this, first, Russia is likely to be with tanks on Ukraine, on Poland's border within a year or two. I was just in Ukraine. It's amazing to go there. The strength of Zelensky is powerful. The strength of the people are powerful, but they don't have the weaponry. So here's what one lieutenant colonel told me. He said, we have drones that are just great to see things, you know. And by the way, the Ukrainians are more advanced than we are. Our army is learning from them in drone technology. And he says, I send the drones over, and I can see exactly where the Russian artillery is, but I have no ammunition to shoot it down. Another guy told me, we don't have enough of these 25 millimeter guns, big guns. The Russians do. Ours only shoot 15 millimeters. So they situate their guns 20 millimeters away. They can shoot at us. We can't shoot at them. Zelensky said it very simply. If we get the armaments in this supplemental package, we will win the war. But if we don't, we will lose the war. It's an inflection point. First, Putin will not stop. He will not stop at Ukraine's border. Speak to the heads of Poland or the Baltic states. He wants to bring back the old Soviet empire under his leadership. But second, imagine the effect on the world. If we don't stand by our allies will turn away from us. You have Trump saying we don't need NATO. Well, Europeans will go their own way. And even worse than our allies leaving us because they realize they can no longer depend on America, our enemies will be emboldened. What do you think Xi thinks of Taiwan when he sees U.S. backing off from Ukraine? What do you think the leaders of Iran and North Korea think? They think the U.S. is what they said, a capitalist paper tiger, soft, fat, and unwilling to defend its values. So the world hangs in the balance, and I feel this passionately. In Ukraine, they're amazing, just amazing what they're going through. A smaller country, only 45, 50 million people. They're all dedicated. They have the plans, they have the courage, they have the strength. They don't have the weapons, over and over again. We need to give it to them, and you have this crazy group of extremists. Well, we put together a Ukraine package. But Donald Trump doesn't want to fund Ukraine. He likes Putin. And unfortunately, the poison of Trump is infecting the Republican Party. You've seen what it's done with the Freedom Caucus in the House. But our Republican leadership here knows that it's infecting the Senate as well. You had 10 of these right-wing, way-out people run against McConnell last time for the first time. And so first they said on the Ukraine package, one poignant moment. We went to a place that was a parking lot in Lviv 4 months ago. And it's now a cemetery. And you see all these newly dug graves, these new graves, and they put a picture of these beautiful young people, one after the other, young men and young women, civilians and military who have died. But while we were there with the new general that Zelensky has put in, who seems to be pretty good, right, the other half of the parking lot, they were digging new graves for the people who were going to be killed. It's awful. Now, we then had the president say, okay, we need border, not the president, Johnson. We need border attached to this. So we passed a really tough border bill that would deal with so many of the problems that we face on the border. It was really strong. It was really tough. Guess who endorsed it? The Wall Street Journal editorial page, the fount of right-wing conservatism in America. They said this is a good, tough bill. The Border Patrol agents endorsed it. And they're right-wing too, pro-Trump. So did the Chamber of Commerce. And it had, by the way, in our border bill, $1.4 billion for the SSP program, which would help relieve some of the burdens New York faces in funding the migrants. And we showed this border bill to our Republican colleagues, leadership. They said, this is a good bill. And then Donald Trump gets up and he says, I don't want the bill. I want chaos at the border for a year because it helps me win the election. The very president who said the border's a menace, the border's a crisis, is now saying delay it for political purposes. The only good news in this thing was that we're now on our front foot on border rather than back foot politically. When you look, there was a survey in the Wall Street Journal just the other day. Who do you believe? Democrats who want to put together a strong bipartisan bill, or Donald Trump who says wait a year? And it's like 2-to-1 in our favor, even among not majority, but a plurality of Republicans agree with that. But this bill is on hold because the Republican leadership in the House is so afraid of Trump that they can't put it on the floor. So we have to pass this supplemental bill without border in it. It passed. I give Mitch McConnell a lot of credit. He bucked Trump, and the bill passed the supplemental security with aid for Israel, humanitarian aid for the Palestinian civilians who are suffering, aid to help us in the South Pacific where China's gaining. It passed the Senate 70-29. We are hopeful that once we finish, and by the way, if it were put on the floor of the House, it would pass. There are a large number of Republicans, particularly those, defense hawks, the old-time Republicans who are defense hawks, who want to get this done. So Johnson has to have the strength and the courage to put it on the floor. He hasn't said yes, he hasn't said no. And hopefully when we finish this budget, we can put enough pressure and heat, because this is an inflection point, folks. History will look back on the day the U.S. didn't fund Ukraine and it lost as a turning point against Western civilization. Not just a year from now, but 10 years and 20 years from now. So I'm fighting as hard as I can to get that done. Okay. Well, let me go over some of the other things we've been able to do. We've had an amazing 2 years. It's good to be the majority leader. It's good to have the majority leader from New York. And incidentally, I'm the first senator from New York who was elected to my 5th term last November. So I thank you all for that. But we got so much done. And if you look at how the actual statistics changed, when Biden took office and I became majority leader, over 3,000 Americans were dying of COVID every day. 18 million Americans were collecting unemployment. Inflation was 9%. Thanks to all the laws we've passed and the investments we've done across the board, we're in much better shape. The public doesn't see it yet, but they will. Economics is always a lagging factor. I will predict by September the public will be much more positive on the economy and on the leadership of the president when that happens. But we did amazing stuff. And by the way, of the 8 big bills we passed last year when we had the House, had the Senate, and the presidency, 7 were bipartisan. 7. And McConnell didn't vote with us most of the time, but he said if his members wanted to join us, and I worked very hard on them. So it was the best Senate, the best legislature in 30 years. In fact, Robert Cairo sent me one of his books, Master of the Senate, and he said, to the Jewish LBJ. I was very proud of that. But some of the things we've done, we had the American Rescue Plan, which, saved us from everything. Subways would have closed, New York pensions would have gone dry, rental assistance, people would have been kicked out of their houses, Broadway would have closed. We had the Save Our Stages bill, which kept not only Broadway, but all the smaller arts institutions there. We got $9 billion for our schools. All of these institutions, if they didn't have any income, it's not just that they wouldn't have been able to produce at the time, but their people would have gone away. Like just take, a Broadway show. No one's getting, if they're not getting paid, they disperse to the rest of the country and take years to put it back. Same thing with any type of agency or nonprofit that was not funded by the government. So we did all that. We passed the bipartisan infrastructure law. And again, I wrote the formula to help New York. And we're building again. we so depend on mass transit. We have the East River tunnels, we have Gateway, East Side Access, Penn Access, Second Avenue subway, huge amounts of money pumped into our economy. But also permanent transportation improvements, which will make our economy better over the long run for a long time. And we put that in the infrastructure bill. We put money for our highways and our bridges, not just new projects, but keep the old things going. $3.5 billion to weatherize buildings, and money to provide broadband for everybody. This is really important in rural areas and why I thought it was so important. Franklin D. Roosevelt in the 1930s said electricity is a necessity. And he created the REA, the Rural Electrification Administration, I guess the A stands for. And it brought rural America up to, well, broadband it brought rural America where it should have been. These days, if you're in a rural area and there's no broadband, it hurts the hospitals who depend on telemedicine. It hurts the schools who depend on a computer for teaching. It hurts bringing small business. It hurts every individual family. So we wrote in the law that every rural home should have broadband. And I think, and by the way, even in the elections of 2022, which this started, our rural areas started voting a little less, it's a political note, I guess, but they started voting a little less Republican because of it, just as rural areas started voting more Democratic when Roosevelt brought them electricity, and you're going to see a lot more of that. We passed the CHIPS and Science Act, which I'll get to in a minute. In the Inflation Reduction Act, it's the largest support for climate change ever. And we did it positively. I went to the BRT, the Business Roundtable, the 200 biggest businesses, and they gave me a standing ovation. I said, that doesn't happen too much. Why? Because they said, you're the first person who really put climate through with carrots, not sticks. Tax incentives. We put in $369 billion of incentives for wind, for solar, for water. And it's so successful that there's now $1 trillion going into that, creating good-paying jobs across the country and New York, much more than they thought. Manchin's mad. You know, he and I did the IRA together. Remember, we had to go into a little room and no one knew we were doing it to do it. And he said, well, you said $369 billion. I said, yeah. I was afraid you'd ask me for a cap, but you didn't. I wasn't going to tell you put a cap in. And so it's much more than it was than before, but it's part of the bill. There are credits for commercial building efficiency upgrades, credits to incentivize construction, for efficient new single and multifamily housing, credits for EV installation, credits for renewable energy technologies. It's going to change. We will reduce the amount of carbon going into the atmosphere by 40% by 2030. That's an amazing accomplishment. Now, if we get back the House, keep the Senate, and keep the presidency, you ain't seen nothing yet. We're going to do a lot more because 40% isn't enough, although it was a lot that we could do under the circumstances. So that's been an amazing piece of legislation. And also included in there was getting the cost of drugs lower. Insulin is now only $35 for people over 65. We're working to get it for everybody. We put a cap. Seniors would come to me and say, I have cancer. There's this cancer drug. My doctor says it'll cure me. It costs $800 a month. My insurance company won't pay for it. What do I do? Die? Well, we put into that law. This year, it's a $3,300 cap. Next year, it's a $2,000 cap on all the drugs people would pay for. People like that will live because of what we did in the IRA. And, you know, we're seeing advantages even here in New York City that we just this year in the budget, based on that law, got $25 million for the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, $48 million for the Arthur Kill Terminal. Both are going to be staging areas. We're going to have more offshore wind in New York than any other state. It creates jobs, creates cheap electricity, and helps our environment. We also put in the in this bill so many other things. We got $2 billion to create the the most advanced cyclotron in the world, even more than Geneva, for Brookhaven National Lab. It's going to really help Long Island's economy. So many different things that we were able to get in that legislation. So with all this stuff, it's the first time, you know, my mentor, Senator Moynihan, what a great man he was. He used to decry the fact that New York was what he called a donor state. We sent more money to Washington than we got back. These 2 years are the first 2 years when New York got back more money than we sent. It's good to have the majority leader from New York. I'm proud of that. Okay. I wanted to talk a little bit about the CHIPS and Science Bill, because we are one state. And I wrote this law because I knew we were no longer investing in science, and chip manufacturing and all the advanced technology was going away from us. You may remember when we were short of chips during COVID, auto plants shut down, everything shut down. These chips are so important. And investing in science is important. The original bill, it's now called the CHIPS and Science Bill. I originally called it the Endless Frontier Act. There was a Secretary of the Army named Vannevar Bush right after World War II. He said, America ought to invest in science. It's the endless frontier. And in fact, because of him, we invested in NSF and DARPA and created the greatest tech industry in the world. We invested in NIH and created the greatest pharmaceutical and medical industry in the world. Investing in pure science research helps dramatically. But when I called it the Endless Frontier Act, people thought it was about covered wagons or something. So we changed the name back to CHIPS and Science. But I wrote a lot of the law with upstate New York particularly in mind, because in my years as Senate, I had sort of ached, when Carrier closed and when Kodak shrunk and when all these auto plants, and these people who love their community saw their children, they'd go to the airport and wave goodbye because their kids couldn't get jobs in their regions. Well, I wrote the CHIPS and Science Act, frankly, with upstate New York in mind, both to building chip fabs. We cannot have a foreign country, particularly in Taiwan and China, control our chip manufacturing. They would be able to choke our economy because chips are used in everything. And investing in science will create the next new frontiers. So we did it. And look what's happening. Last month, I'm so proud of this, and it's so important for all of New York State. The Biden administration just announced, and I'm pushing all of these, of course, $1.5 billion for global foundries. They make legacy chips. Those are the chips our auto companies, our computers, our cell phones use. It's the largest grant so far, $1.5 billion. They built one plant a while back up in Malton near Saratoga. It's the largest legacy chips in the country. They're building a new one there. The biggest private investment, period, in all of chip manufacturing is occurring in White Pine, right near Syracuse. Micron is investing $100 billion to build memory chips, which are the most cutting-edge chip. It'll be the biggest plant in the world. It's going to employ up to 9,000 people. You go to Syracuse, people have hope in the future. When Carrier closed, I met the head of United Technologies, and this son of a gun, he said, oh, don't worry, we're shutting down Carrier, but no one wants to live in Syracuse anyway. Well, that's changing. In the Hudson Valley, IBM is investing, and we have a company called Onsemi, which closed we say all this technology and all these grants has to be made in America. They closed 2 plants in Asia to start building chips in the Hudson Valley. Here's a really good one. Binghamton University. SUNY is a blessing to upstate New York. All of our colleges are, public and private, in New York City and upstate. But the guy who won the Nobel Prize for inventing the lithium-ion battery, an Englishman, but he's a professor at Binghamton University. His name is Whittingham. Very modest, nice man. And we have now gotten over $300 million in grants to make Binghamton University, where IBM used to be, where Endicott Shoes used to be, the center of research into lithium-ion batteries and one of the manufacturing centers of lithium-ion batteries in Utica. My dad's from Utica. I don't know if people know that. But Wolfspeed is investing in building the largest silicon carbon factory. And probably the best thing of all, there's going to be one national semiconductor tech center. And in the lead to get, which is going to do the next generation of chip research. And guess who's likely to get it? Albany, New York. There's something called Albany Nano in Albany. And it will just blossom that region and all of upstate. So upstate has a really good future now, which it really didn't 5 or 10 years ago because of investing in chips and in science. Finally, I want to just touch on artificial intelligence. So this is, of course, the new frontier. And it's really hard. It's the hardest thing maybe I've ever looked at legislatively for 4 reasons, or 3 reasons, I guess. 1, it's so complicated. 2, it keeps changing. And 3, we don't have a legislative history on it. You know, we know what to do in defense or health care a lot of the times because we have a long history. Here we don't have one. But we can't do nothing. It has amazing potential, curing cancer, ending world hunger. Incredible. But it also has tremendous danger. And so the trick is you need some guardrails. If you just let everybody use this, first, our enemies could get it. You know, our competitors, let's not call them enemies, China and other places. But second, it could be used for bad purpose by some individual, some small group, or some rogue country. So you need certain guardrails. And the trick is to thread the needle. Don't stifle the great innovation, the positive innovation, transformational innovation, we call it, that we need. But at the same time, you need sustainable innovation so this thing doesn't go off the guardrails and everybody says, forget it, we shouldn't do it, it's too dangerous. And that's what I'm endeavoring to do. So we put together, you have to do these things bipartisan, a bipartisan group of myself and Senator Heinrich, he's a Democrat, and Senator Rounds and Senator Young, 2 of the Republicans. It's good to work with. They're really good, solid folks. And we are going to put together a framework and then try to pass legislation. And I'm consulting our New York tech industries, our New York AI people. New York has a real chance. We are getting about 1/4 of the venture capital for AI research right now. And we could get even more. So it's really important to get this done. We have put together a plan. We'll be putting out a blueprint, a framework in about a month called Safe Innovation. Innovation has to be the North Star. You cannot stifle innovation. But at the same time, you have to make sure it doesn't go off the rails, so you need some kind of guard. Well, we call it Safe Innovation, and the SAFE stands for security, keeping us safe from our adversaries and from others, accountability, making sure there are guardrails so the AI doesn't use to exploit people, and there are certain issues here, bias. If you just use all the old data and there was redlining, people of color will be discriminated against in the new, in these new, what seem to be, non-political numbers, but they have a lot of politics laden in them because of our past history. So accountability, foundations, we want it to align with our values, and explainability. One way to make AI a little more accountable is make sure it explains itself. So when you ask an AI system to do something and they spit out several sentences, you know where they're coming from. I'll give you a superficial example. So if you ask AI for recipe for how do you lose weight, and they say eat a lot of hot dogs, you say, huh? But if there's explainability and it says, oh, we got those sentences from Oscar Mayer, you'll know what's going on. But explainability is also really important to New York because we have so many innovative, we have publishing and we have art and we have all of this. And if you don't know how the AI is using it, there's no intellectual property protections. And it really hurts our New York, our cultural and writing and publishing and all that, thinking about it. So explainability is the last part and very, very important. This is hard, but we have to do it. If we don't pass these guardrails, things could go off the deep end. But we also have to encourage a lot of the pure research, and our four of us, even two Republicans, agree that we got to put about $32 billion into the various agencies, NIST and others, to help us advance the innovations in AI. That's going to be one of the hardest things we've undertaken, but as Teddy Roosevelt said, we're in the arena, so let's take a shot at it and see what we can do. So basically, those are some of the things I'm working on. In closing, you know I love New York. It's in my bones. Candidates come up and ask me, what's your advice? And I say, my best advice is be yourself, because the public may not know the difference between your education policy and somebody and your opponents, but they can smell a phony a mile away. So I tell them, I'm from Brooklyn. Sometimes it helps me. Thank you. I say, sometimes it helps me, sometimes it hurts me. But if I tried not to be from Brooklyn, I'd be worse than whatever I am. So I love New York. I love representing New York as majority leader. I'm busier than I've ever been, but I have more energy for this job than I've ever had. You know, I feel the same as when I first started. I was elected to the Assembly when I was 23 in 1974, before a good number of you were born. But I have as much enthusiasm as I've ever had. And I'll close by telling you a little story about my dad. My dad was a great guy. He passed away 2 years ago at 98. And he was a very smart guy, but circumstances in life didn't let him do what he wanted to do, and he had this junky little exterminating business. My sister once sent us a Father's Day card, or sent him a Father's Day card that said, Dad, we're the only family that associates the smell of DDT with love. Because he'd come home stinking of the chemicals. But he left me values. For those of you who've been close to your parents, you know, he's still here. I still hear him. And the two values he left me with that shaped my life and you know, show you who I am. One is he always said, try to help people who need help. He said that's a noble thing to do. But the second thing he taught me was this. He said, if you're doing something important, whether it's personal or family or professional or business or whatever, if you're doing something important, look in your heart. Make sure it's the right thing to do. And once you're sure it's the right thing to do, he said, persist and persist and persist and don't give up, and God will reward you and you will succeed. So, I'm in a job to help people, everybody I can, but New York in particular. But together, all of you and us, we are going to persist and persist and persist and not give up to make New York even bigger, better, and grander than it is today. Thank you. Question?
So, Senators going back to D.C. this morning, we have a few moments for a few questions. So, Jennifer Hensley from Con Ed.
Senator, thank you for your leadership. Jen Hensley from Con Edison. You talked about a lot of things that you've accomplished, and you and your colleagues in Congress. Looking ahead to the election, any thoughts, any perspectives on what we should expect?
Okay. I didn't want to make this terribly political, although I had to talk about these crazy right-wingers who are just, you know, killing us. They're killing the country. But in any case, yeah. I think that President Biden's going to win the election. And I think we have a damn good chance of taking back the Senate, of keeping the Senate and gaining the House. Why? Well, first you have, as I said, you have a really strong economy, and it's a lagging indicator. So it will catch up, and things will be better. In September, I think Biden will look better than he looks today in the poll numbers because of the economy and because he's now out campaigning. You know, it's hard governing, and he's a governor, small g. He was a senator. He loves to legislate. I talk to him all the time. By the way, this idea, you know, from the right wing that he's sort of lost it is just ridiculous. He's with it. He's fine on that. He's very good on that all the time. I never find him losing it, so to speak. But he's governing all the time, and it takes a lot of work and energy. It's not just the U.S., it's the whole world. But now he's getting into a campaign mode. And you're seeing the Joe Biden that we've seen for decades. You saw it in the speech Thursday night. One of my favorite moments in the speech, which you probably couldn't see on TV, you saw how good a speech it was, I'm sure. But he chastised the Republican House members and senators. And, you know, for instance, he said to them, we all know what happened on January 6th. And you know what happened. Why don't you just admit it? And the TV didn't look at them because they just looked at him. But there they were with their faces down in their laps, looking like the school teacher had chastised them for being bad students or not doing the right thing. They got it. So he's going to be out there in a campaign mode, and I think you're going to see a Biden with the vigor and the strength that we've all known. I think that there's talk, a lot of Democrats aren't going to vote for Biden. I don't think that's going to be the case. It's changing. When people said, well, it may not be Biden, it may not be Trump, I don't want to vote for Biden. Now that it's clear it's Biden-Trump, they're going to be faced with the reality. And I go around and I talk to young people and say, I'm not voting for Biden because of this or because of that. And I say, I want to ask you a question. If it's Biden-Trump, you got 6 choices. Vote for Biden, vote for Trump, stay home, vote for Bobby Kennedy, vote for Cornel West, vote for Jill Stein. And 90% of them say, well, I guess I'd have to vote for Biden. But here's the other point, which I think is a more salient point. There are more Republicans who are not going to vote for Trump than Democrats who are not going to vote for Biden. Just look at these last primaries. The media was not deep enough on these, in my judgment. When in a Republican primary, which gets the right hard side of the Republican voters, primaries tend to get the people at the more extremes. He only got 70%, 65%, in a few places in the 50s. And when they did exit polls of the people who didn't vote for Trump, more than half of them said, I'm never voting for Trump. I'm a Bush Republican. I'm a Reagan Republican, but I am not a Trump Republican. And that number is going to be large. Even in the polls today, you know, it's 45, 47, 43, 42, and all that. The people who are undecided, a very significant chunk of them, enough to put the election in good shape for Biden, say, I'm never voting for Trump. I'm just not saying who I'm voting for. So I am optimistic about this election, and I think that Biden will win. Our senators, every one of our incumbent senators, is running ahead of their opponents. It's very good, and we have placed 2 states where I think we can win in both. In Texas, we have a great candidate named Colin Allred, and nobody likes Ted Cruz very much. And one of the issues that's going to help us in the election, is choice. It's very, very important, women's right to choose. And you saw what happened with the IVF in Alabama, and they're going to stumble over this for the next 6 to 8 months. But we have on the ballot in many states a choice question. So take Florida, where Rick Scott, by the way, said one of the ways to cure the economy is cut Social Security and cut Medicare. That's a very smart thing to say in Florida with the elderly people. But he's an ideologue. He's a right-wing ideologue. But in any case, it's on the ballot in Florida. DeSantis's popularity, at least by our polling data, went from 64-25 when he was, before he passed the ban on abortion after a woman's 6 weeks pregnant. Many women don't even know they're pregnant at 6 weeks. And he went from 64-25 to 47-49. And that's going to be on the ballot, and as a turnout, we have a very good candidate there named Debbie Musgrove Powell. She's a Latina immigrant from Ecuador with a great story, how she started working in a donut shop and climbed her way up. So 2 years ago, people said, oh, you're going to lose 5, 6 seats in the Senate. I said, we'll stay even or gain a seat or two, and said, I don't believe you, but we did. Well, I'm telling you right now, we're going to stay even or pick up a seat or two, and I will continue to be Senate Majority Leader.
Next up, Vinny Alvarez.
Hi, Vincenzo.
Good morning. Terrific job as always.
Represents the great working people of New York.
Amen. All right. We heard you talk earlier about Gateway. It's such a critically important infrastructure project, of course, for working people and for the business community here. Can you give us any updates, any critical needs that we still have in order to make sure that goes ahead smoothly in the future?
Yes. Well, look, it's the biggest public works project ever in America. I'm saying to one of my mentors, Tip O'Neill, who was proud of the big dig, we're going to beat you. We're going to have more money you spent here in New York than you spent in Boston. But it's working out extremely well. We're making good progress. Again, when we did the infrastructure bill, one of the things I had in mind was New York projects and Gateway in particular, because it is so large. So now we have a great structure. It's called the Gateway Development Corp. Someone named Chris Calori is the CEO. He's from New Jersey. And by the way, unlike in the past, the New York and New Jersey governors are both aligned with Gateway, so that's very good. Our previous governor wasn't so hot on Gateway, but now everyone's totally on board. So on the New Jersey side, they're working on the Portal Bridge. On the New York side, we have this casing project, building the casing, the tunnels under the ground, under some of the big buildings over in Hudson Yards. That just got a $292 million grant. This summer, contract awards worth $1 billion are going to be awarded. It's going to be a huge project. Gateway's going to start drawing down federal funds from a combined pot of $12 billion. It's called the Capital Investment Grant, and from the FRA's state-federal-state partnership. It's, as I said, the biggest mass transit project in history. Gateway Development Corporation is now staffing up and getting the expertise to do it. So it's all systems go. All the barriers that were in the way, and there'll be new ones, of course. That's how it is when it's a huge, big project. But all the barriers that were in the way are not, and it's just spending the money and getting it built. You all know how important this is. Those tunnels are vital to the whole economy of New York, New Jersey, and the whole Northeast. And, during Sandy, the salt water got inside and corroded them. So every expert says at some point they won't be usable. And our whole economy, the whole national economy, would go into a recession if it happened. So this is sort of the thinking ahead. It's not going to be ready for quite a while. But if we didn't start on it now, remember, we could have done it back in, I forgot what year, but the early 2000s, and Governor Christie took the money out of that to do paved roads. How silly. Not silly, but backward thinking. And now we're all systems go, and it's one of my missions, is to get Gateway completed. So far, so good. And Vincenzo, as I call him, it's going to employ so many New York workers, 70,000 or something. And again, these are not just good jobs for these people, but that pumps money into our economy. Public Works has always kept our economy going. And this is going to be one of the biggest influxes we've ever had.
All right, we have time for one final question. We're going to go to Jim Whalen.
Hi, Jim.
But maybe I should take 1 minute to say our former mayor's here. Mayor Bill DePazio, thank you for joining us.
Mr. Majority Leader, first off, thanks for everything you've done for the city, state, and region over the last 4 years, which were probably particularly among the most difficult 4 years in the city's history, and your leadership really helped us get through it, so thanks again. My question is, can you bring us up to speed on the status of the bipartisan tax package that's in Congress? Where do you see it headed, and what's in it for New York?
Great. Okay. This is the art of compromise, again. So we Democrats really thought this child tax credit was one of the best things we ever did during COVID. And as you know, it gave poorer families, but about 70% of all families got some help. But the poorer you were, the more you got. And it helped feed kids and buy diapers and all these other kinds of things. This is a fact to be really proud of. 40% to 45% of the children in America were taken out of poverty when the CTC existed. But now I negotiated this with Mnuchin and Trump, and it was very hard to get anything, but I insisted, but we couldn't make it permanent. We had it expire when we thought COVID would be over. So it's now expired, and the child poverty rate's going back up again, of course. So we're trying to revitalize it, and of course, with the Republican House, it's not so easy. Can't just pass it, with Democratic House, Democratic Senate, Democratic President. But one of the things the business community wants very much is the R&D tax credit. I'm for it. I think it's a good thing. Encouraging our businesses to invest in R&D is seed corn, just like investing in all the things I mentioned in chips and science is seed corn. And so Ron Wyden, who is head of our finance committee, and a guy named Smith, who is Jason Smith from Missouri, who is conservative, but he's one of those conservatives who wants to get things done, said, why don't we marry the two? So that's what's in the bill right now, and it has broad support in the House. They're voting on it. It's going to pass the House. The House has the advantage of having a rules committee that allows the Speaker to put on the floor an amendment, a bill, and say no amendments. That's one of the reasons the House flows more smoothly than the Senate. We do not have that, and any one senator can block things for a very long period of time. So it's much harder to get a tax bill done in the Senate because every senator wants to add his or her own provision. So we have to figure out a way to get this done. And right now, Mike Crapo, who's the head of the Republican leader of the Finance Committee, wants to add new things, and he's debating that with Wyden. But I hope we can get this done because it'll be very good for taking kids out of poverty. It'll be very good for the R&D tax credit. And we won't be able to add anything new in there. One point I would make, though, in relation to taxes, one of the worst things that happened was when Trump and the Republicans, led by some New York business leaders who I still am mad about, decided to put a cap on state and local deductibility. And that expires in a year and a half. And as long as I'm majority leader, it's going to expire, every bit of it. And that will help restore New York to some tax equity. I'm not going to let anything happen. Not going to let anything happen in the tax bill that would extend it in any way. So we're trying to get this done. It's not certain, but I'd put the odds at least 50-50 that we get this bill done with the R&D credit. Oh, one other thing, I insisted, so they put this compromise together, and I told Ron Wyden I am not supporting it unless you add the low-income housing tax credit to it. So we now we're so short of housing, and LIHTC has done more to build housing, affordable housing in New York than anything else, and so that's in the bill. And so it has three good things. And if it passes, it'll have those three things and probably nothing else. But we still got to work our way through through Crapo and the Senate Republicans who want to add other things, subtract other things. They want to detract from the child tax credit. We want it refundable. So poorer families who don't pay taxes get some help to feed their kids, get them out of poverty and buy them school stuff and all that. And they don't want that, so that's one of the bones of contention.
All right. I want to say thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Senator, for being here, and thanks for being here.
Oh, I want to say one more thing, okay? I always say this. So people say, oh, what's the future of big cities? Maybe people don't want to live in big cities. New York's population in 2010 census was 8.1 million. New York's population in the 2020 census was 8.9 million. So not only did we gain 800,000 people, we're the biggest city, so yeah, of course. But per capita, of the 25 largest metropolitan areas, we were the fourth biggest. Only Nashville, Travis County, Austin, and Texas, and Salt Lake City were higher. People are flocking to New York. poor people, middle-class people, well-to-do people, they're flocking to New York. And so people love New York. They love our diversity. They love our intensity. They love our just energy. And so don't bet against New York. Never bet against New York. Our best days are yet to come. Thank you.